Hello everyone, and holy moly do I have good news for you guys. Take a look at the dispersion you're seeing on screen. Yes, that is in fact the Ibuki I am playing, and look at the dispersion of those AP shells. I aim a bit low, a bit too far back, and I do a bit of adjustment, and take a look at the next volley dispersion as well. You might be seeing something a bit new, a bit fresh, when you look at just how tight and closed that dispersion is. 5 citadels on that Neptune, 30,000 damage. And that's because they are finally buffing the IJN ships. All the main battery guns of 203mm belonging to the Japanese cruisers. This is Furutaka, Aoba, Myoko, Mogami, Ibuki, ARP Myoko, ARP Ashigara, ARP Haguro, Southern Dragon, Eastern Dragon, ARP Nachi, and even ARP Takao. All of them are receiving a buff in accuracy, similar to what the Zao has. The point of the IJN cruisers was always that, well, the reload was pretty slow, but they were supposed to do really good volley damage. That was always the bread and butter of this IJN cruiser line, and Wargaming has finally decided, okay, enough is enough. This IJN cruiser line has been suffering long enough, so they are giving every single cruiser of the line that same pinpoint accuracy that the Zao enjoys. So that is obviously a very significant buff, and that's probably why you're seeing why my dispersion is so very good on the ship, and why it's so easy for me to pinpoint specific. It's good, of course, for citadeling ships, because, well, more important AP is always more useful AP. But also when you're trying to burn down ships, which is something you spend a lot of time doing in the Ibuki because your fire chance is so high, it's significantly easier to target specific parts of the ship and start individual fires on these battleships. And obviously all of this leads to an overall increase in damage across the board for all 203mm guns. Worth noting that because this is a fundamental mechanic change, meaning they are changing the mechanics for the entire gun, all of the guns, it also means that it affects the Atago. AKA, this is one of those rare cases where a premium is getting buffed. Normally, they never individually buff premiums, but if there are mechanic changes like this, then it also means a buff for the premium ships. So all you Atago owners are pretty damn happy now, I would assume. Now, another thing worth mentioning is that the Myoko is getting a turret traverse buff from 4 degrees per second to 5 degrees per second. So basically 25% faster turret traverse. That is pretty damn significant. That is absolutely a massive increase. From 4 to 5, so of course since this applies to the Myoko, and because once again this is a mechanic change, it also applies to the ARP Myoko, to the ARP Ashigara, to the ARP Haguro, to the Southern Dragon, to the Eastern Dragon, and even to the ARP Nachi. Man, there are so many of those weeaboo Myokos, but every single one of them is getting that across the board buff as well. Now, they actually don't end it here, which makes me very happy. You might be noticing when you're looking at the gameplay, I'm showing some Ibuki gameplay, I've been testing it on the PTS, is the fact that my reload looks unusually slow. And it's not just because I'm running the 3 million reload booster, no, they also buffed the reload from 15 seconds to 13.7, which is obviously a pretty significant deal. And I mean, the Ibuki has long suffered. It still suffers the same weakness, which is of course that it's very squishy with a large citadel, but with this reload buff and this very high chance of setting fires, it actually means that this thing is a bit more of a threat right now. And of course with the improved dispersion as well. So all of this combined has given a lot of new life to the Ibuki, a ship that has been often among my quoted worst tier 9 cruisers in the game. And they're finally, it took them a long time, but they're finally doing something about it. And oh man, it is very refreshing to play this new Ibuki. Yes, you still have the same issues with the squishiness. Yes, you get citadel easily well angled, but this improved accuracy, this improved reload, all of that combined means that you are actually able to deal some significant damage in return while trading against your enemy ships. So overall, all IJN cruisers getting a significant buff. Now there are some cases, for example the Mogami, where buffing the 203mm dispersion is probably not going to change much when it comes to how I approach the ship, because I still think 155mm guns, the DPM that you get with IFHE is just so incredibly strong that I don't really see the point of switching to 203mm guns. So in terms of the Mogami, the actual impact will probably be quite small, but the premium Atago, that's going to be quite spicy, because the Atago, of course, has fantastic concealment. Now you got really good dispersion as well on the AP, so you can probably do a lot better this kind of ambush play that you're seeing right here, where basically you pop out of stealth with AP loaded and then you just delete some broadside cruiser. You can probably execute stuff like that in the Atago much better after the upcoming buff. And the Furutaka, of course, which was already a stupidly strong tier 5. Make no mistake, Furutaka is one of the best tier 5 cruisers in the game by far. That thing is obviously going to become even more monstrous, because now you have Zao type dispersion at tier 5 on 203mm guns that already match pretty much all your competition. So the Furutaka can become an absolute monster. On the other hand, ships like the Aoba probably really needed this buff, just like the Ibuki really needed this buff. The Myoko overall is just going to be a lot more comfortable to play, because faster turret traverse, no longer that glacial turret traverse. I tested a bit of Myoko, and the best thing is that you can actually make turns now, and your guns no longer lag behind when you make full turns. Your guns actually keep up with your turns, and oh man, it is so much more comfortable to play. It is such a quality of life increase to actually not have to stop turning just to be able to shoot your guns, because your guns are lagging behind. They can't keep up with your turns at all. So quality of life, Myoko, huge increase. And of course, the Myoko always had a very hard-hitting broadside, and with the dispersion buff, the Myoko hard-hitting broadside will hit even harder. So overall, fantastic changes. I'm sure this I think was the first Ibuki game I played on the PTS after this change came out, and already I'm able to rack up some really good damage, considering it's an Ibuki we're playing. Of course, it's PTS, so results will probably not apply the same way to live servers, because gameplay is always a lot more questionable on the PTS, but it does show you that improved dispersion and that improved reload, both of which make the Ibuki far more enjoyable to play, and actually gives you some real carry potential in the ship, even though you end up probably being up-tiered pretty much all the time. That's kind of how it works at tier 9. It's kind of how it works at tier 8 as well, but tier 9 is of course even more extreme. But that's not all the buffs they're adding to the IJN. The destroyers are getting their share as well. Now, while I discuss the upcoming IJN Destroyer changes, what you're seeing here in the background is actually one of these new dynamic storms that Wargaming are adding to the game. And if you look at the minimap, you can see how it's slowly moving in across the map, and it's actually going to continue crossing over all the caps and going through the entire map. And this is this new thunderstorm mechanic that they're testing, and which looks really cool. There's still some optimization issues, by the way. There's some serious FPS drops, especially when I was streaming and I was doing this. I was getting some big drops in it. So obviously they still need to optimize it a bit, but the new mechanic is pretty cool. I'll get into the storms a bit more in detail in just a bit. I'm just letting you enjoy the visuals as you can see that ominous stormcloud approach. So the Japanese destroyers, they are also getting a buff. Pretty much all of them. Japanese destroyers Hatsuharu, Fubuki, Shiratsuyu, Akatsuki, Kagero, Yugumo, Shimakaze, Shinonome, Asashio, Asashio B, and Harekaze are all getting a significant buff in damage, because the damage on the HE shell is being increased from 1,800 to 2,150. Now, for those that don't feel like doing the math, that's almost a 20% DPM buff. That's right, IJN destroyers across the board, all of their guns, 20% DPM buff. So, all those people who don't use their guns in IJN DDs, well, they're gonna look even dumber now, because you just got a massive buff for that. And on top of that raw damage increase, they are also increasing the chance of fire from 7% to 9%. Now, obviously, increased fire chance is fantastic for Japanese destroyers, mostly because, well, you torp so much, you focus so heavily on the torping, but now if you do get a flooding on a battleship, there's really no excuse for not occasionally smoking up and trying to follow up that flooding with a fire after they've damage gone. This was a very much due change, because I mean there's been so many hard-hitting, nasty counters added over time. I mean, we had the Yu-Yang radar. The Yu-Yang, of course, is getting nerfed very heavily. But then we had, more importantly, we have the Royal Navy destroyer line, which I mentioned is very good at countering this line as well. There's been so much nasty competition being added. So now you actually have a significantly better alpha on these guns, and especially the Shimakaze that can lob 6 of these shells at a time, the increased DPM is quite noticeable and quite enjoyable. Also note again, of course, that because this is a mechanic change across the board for all Japanese guns, it also means that premium ships like Shinonome, Asashio, Asashio B and Harakaze, they all get this buff. So once again, Japanese premiums also getting a significant buff here. Now, what you've probably been noticing here, you just saw a rainstorm, a thunderstorm, and now you're seeing on Islands of Ice, you're seeing a snowstorm. So there's different types. Sometimes they move across the map. I've seen the epicenter in this epicenter game mode. I've actually seen the storm hover on top of the middle of the epicenter. So if you want to contest the cap, you have to push into the storm. So this new storm mechanic actually looks pretty damn cool. There are some visual effects I would still like to see added. For example, I don't like the fact that the sea is so calm. The sea is the sea doesn't change at all, even though you're supposed to be in the middle of a storm. I'd love to see some choppier waves, like some more significance to show off the fact that you're in a storm. But the mechanic is pretty interesting. You get a buff in concealment. Well, everyone gets a buff in concealment. And the bloom time when you fire is actually only 7 seconds instead of 20. So if you fire your guns, normally you have to wait 20 seconds to get undetected. But in these storms, it's only 7 seconds. So it opens up this kind of ambush play, and you can shoot them before the ship can turn its guns. You're already undetected. Like, there's a lot of tricks you can pull in the storm. Also, if you try to shoot at targets in the storm, you will have reduced accuracy. So there are benefits, but there's of course also downsides, because if you're fighting other ships in the storm, well, obviously you're going to struggle hitting them as well. And more importantly, there's the visibility. You can see it's pretty damn hard at times to see things in this storm. It can be pretty iffy to line up shots, especially if they're close to islands. But overall, I like the idea, I like the concept, I like dynamic weather. Anything that adds some spice without affecting the gameplay too much is, in my opinion, very interesting. And anything that opens up these outplay possibilities is always cool. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this patch preview, and I will talk to you guys later.